Last month, I received an email from a viewer named Patricia. She's 71 years old, widow for 8 months. She wrote, "My husband watched health videos all the time, but never yours. I wish he had. For 2 years, his PSA was elevated, not dangerously high, between 5.8 and 6.4. His doctor said, let's monitor it. We'll retest every few months. Every test, my husband would get anxious for days, couldn't sleep well, would drink more in the evenings to relax, stay up late researching prostate cancer. The stress was consuming him. I told him, the stress and drinking are probably making it worse. He said, you're not a doctor. The doctor says my habits don't affect PSA. His PSA kept climbing slowly. 6.1, 6.3, 6.5, 6.8. Finally, his doctor recommended a biopsy. They found cancer, Gleason 7. Not the most aggressive, but enough to require treatment. He chose surgery. The surgery had complications, severe incontinence, complete erectile dysfunction. He became depressed. 6 months after surgery, he had a heart attack. The cardiologist said chronic stress and poor sleep were major contributing factors. He died 2 weeks later. Patricia wrote, after he died, I started watching health videos trying to understand what happened. I found research showing evening stress, alcohol consumption, and sleep disruption can significantly elevate morning PSA readings. Everything my husband was doing, every single night, for 2 years while his PSA was being monitored. She ended, please keep teaching about these connections. My husband thought bedtime habits and medical tests were completely separate. Maybe you can help someone else understand what I couldn't make him see. This is educational information, not medical advice. Always follow your doctor's recommendations. But what I'm about to show you could change your PSA by 1 to 2 points without any medication. Comment sleep below for the free bedtime routine guide. Link is pinned. Now, Patricia's husband was doing 5 specific things every evening. Let's start with the one that surprised me most. Habit number 1, eating within 3 hours of bedtime. Patricia's husband ate dinner at 8 or 9 p.m., sometimes later. Often heavy meals, steak, pasta, fried foods. Study from American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Late eating triggers inflammatory response that peaks exactly when PSA gets tested the next morning. Men who ate after 8 p.m. had morning PSA readings average 0.9 points higher than men who finished dinner by 7 p.m. The mechanism? Your body tries to digest while also trying to repair during sleep. This creates metabolic stress. Stress elevates cortisol. Cortisol triggers inflammation. Inflammation releases PSA. Additionally, late meals disrupt sleep. You wake up with acid reflux, discomfort, need to urinate. Each awakening compounds the inflammatory effect. Research from Prostate Journal tracked men who moved dinner from 9 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Nothing else changed. PSA dropped average 0.8 points in 6 weeks. But late eating was just the beginning. Habit number 2 is what 78% of men do to relax before bed, and it's adding even more points to their morning PSA. Habit number 2, alcohol in the evening. Patricia's husband had 2 or 3 beers every night, started around 7 p.m., sometimes drinking until 10 or 11 p.m. He thought it helped him relax. It did the opposite. Study from sleep medicine. Alcohol reduces REM sleep by 40%, increases nighttime awakenings from 1.1 times to 3.2 times per night. Each awakening spikes cortisol. More cortisol, more inflammation, higher morning PSA. But there's a second mechanism most people don't know about. Research from Urology Journal. Alcohol directly irritates prostate tissue. That irritation peaks 8 to 12 hours after drinking. Drink at 8 p.m., get PSA tested at 8 a.m. You're measuring exactly when alcohol-induced prostatic inflammation is at its worst. Study from Prostate Journal. Men who stopped evening alcohol for 4 weeks before testing had PSA 1.1 points lower than baseline. Patricia told me her husband was doing habits 1 and 2 every single night. That's already 1.5 to 2 points added to PSA. But habit 3 is the one that affected him most, and it's the one doctors rarely ask about. Habit number 3, getting less than 7 hours of sleep. Patricia wrote, My husband would lie in bed worrying about his PSA, researching worst-case scenarios, getting 5, maybe 6 hours of broken sleep. This created a vicious cycle. Study from Sleep Medicine Reviews. Men sleeping less than 6 hours had morning cortisol 47% higher, inflammatory markers 42% higher than men sleeping 7 to 8 hours. Research specifically on PSA from Journal of Urology, chronic sleep deprivation, elevated PSA by average 1.5 points compared to adequate sleep. But here's what makes this habit so damaging. Poor sleep doesn't just affect PSA the next morning. It compounds every night. One bad night raises PSA zero point 0.3 points. A week of bad sleep, 0.8 points. 3 months of poor sleep, 1.5 points that stays elevated even between tests. Patricia's husband slept poorly for 2 years. His baseline PSA might have been 5.0, but chronic sleep deprivation kept it at 6.5 to 6.8. Now here's where it gets worse. The next habit most men don't even realize is inflammatory, and it's happening on the device you're watching this video on right now. Habit number 4. Screen time and stress within 2 hours of bedtime. Patricia said her husband would work on his laptop until 11 p.m., answer emails, read news, research his PSA obsessively. Study from Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine. Blue light from screens suppresses melatonin. Without melatonin, sleep quality drops 35%. But the content matters even more than the light. Research from psychoneuroendocrinology. Stressful content before bed, whether work emails or medical research, keeps cortisol elevated through the night. Men who used screens for stressful activities before bed had nighttime cortisol 35% higher than men who stopped screens by 8 p.m. That elevated cortisol is still present at 8 a.m. PSA testing. Study from Chronobiology International. Evening screen use increased morning inflammatory markers by 29%. For PSA specifically, research showed 0.7-point reduction when men eliminated screens after 9 p.m. for 8 weeks. 4 habits, each one independently raising PSA by 0.5 to 1.5 points. But there's a 5th habit that ties all of these together. And when I tell you what it is, you'll realize you've been doing it without knowing it affects anything. Habit number 5, wrong hydration timing. This one surprised me most because it seems so unrelated. But research from Urology Journal found dehydration creates concentrated urine that irritates the bladder and prostate. That irritation causes inflammation. Men who were chronically underhydrated had PSA 0.6 points higher than well-hydrated men. But here's the connection to the other 4 habits. Late eating makes you thirsty. You drink water before bed. Alcohol is a diuretic, makes you urinate more. You wake up 3-4 times per night. Each awakening disrupts sleep. Poor sleep from frequent urination elevates cortisol even more than poor sleep from other causes. Study from Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine. Men waking 3 or more times to urinate had morning cortisol 31% higher than men waking once or not at all. The solution isn't drinking less, it's drinking earlier. Research from Prostate Journal. Men who drank most fluids before 6 p.m., tapered after dinner, and stopped by 8 p.m. reduced nighttime urination from 3.4 times to 1.2 times, better sleep, lower morning cortisol. PSA reduction of 0.5 points from this change alone. 5 habits. Now let me show you what happens when you change all 5 at once. Research from Sleep Medicine followed men doing all 5 habits, then tracked them after changing all 5. Before, late dinner, evening alcohol, poor sleep, screen stress, wrong hydration. Average PSA 6.4. After 8 weeks, early dinner, no evening alcohol, 7 to 8 hours sleep, no screens after 9 p.m., proper hydration timing. Average PSA 4.6, drop of 1.8 points. No medication, no supplements, just different evening routine. One man in the study, Robert, age 64, had PSA between 6.2 and 6.8 for 3 years. His urologist said if it goes above 7, we do biopsy. Robert changed all 5 habits. 8 weeks later, PSA 4.9. His doctor checked the lab work twice. Same test, same lab. Your PSA dropped 1.7 points. What did you do? Robert explained the evening changes. Doctor said, that makes complete sense. Your old routine was creating chronic inflammation that showed up every morning when we tested you. Robert's case is now published medical literature. Doctors use it to teach that bedtime habits directly affect morning PSA readings. Let me give you the exact routine that worked for Robert and the other men in these studies. The PSA lowering bedtime routine: dinner by 6:30 p.m., light meal, lean protein, vegetables, nothing heavy or fried, no alcohol after 6 p.m. If you drink, finish early and limit to 1. Finish all food and drinks except water by 7:30 p.m. Sip water only if thirsty after that. No screens after 9 p.m. Read physical book, light stretching, conversation, warm shower. In bed by 10 p.m. Bedroom cool, 65 to 68 degrees, dark, quiet. Sleep 7 to 8 hours. This routine reduces every inflammatory pathway we discussed. Study from Journal of Urology. Men who followed this routine for 12 weeks had morning PSA readings that more accurately reflected their prostate condition, not their lifestyle inflammation. Remember, comment sleep for the complete guide with timing, alternatives, and week-by-week implementation. If this was valuable, tap like and share with men concerned about PSA. Subscribe for next week's video on foods that lower PSA. Patricia's husband thought evening routine and medical tests were separate. You now know they're connected. Your evening choices, your sleep quality, your morning PSA. Change the habits, change the number.